at Groton School, and veteran educational consultant Faith Howland. Ian has served as the Director of Admission at Groton School for 8 years. Ian has also worked at the Lawrenceville School, Avon Old Farm, and the Cambridge School of Weston. He is also the founding president of the Gateway Application System. Faith Howland has more than 40 years of experience helping thousands of families and their children find the right independent school education. Faith is a founding member of the Independent Educational Consultants Association and a recipient of the William Bretnall Award from SSATB for her exemplary contribution to the field of independent school admission. Tonight, Ian and Faith will provide an overview of the benefits and advantages of boarding schools, including considering the best match for your child, deadlines and schedules, tips for scheduling boarding school visits and interviews, common applications, and how to work with educational consultants. Due to the number of participants, all attendees will be muted. At the end of the presentation, we will open up the questions section on the GoToWebinar control panel. Should you have a question that hasn't been covered, we encourage you to reach out to the schools which you are applying to for specific answers. If the question is specifically related to the SSAT, please feel free to contact SSATB customer service at info@ssat.org. You can also reach our customer service team via online chat or by phone. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Help Center page on ssat.org tomorrow. A reminder, again, that all attendees will be muted throughout this presentation, and we will take questions at the end. Let's get started. Ian?
Thanks, Trish. Good evening, Faith.
Hi, Ian, and welcome to everybody listening.
Thank you for tuning in. Let me remind everybody that you don't have to scurry to take notes now. This webinar is being recorded and will be available in a few days, right, Trish? Yeah.
Tomorrow
okay, that's
tomorrow
good.
morning.
That's
it will
great.
Be available.
Okay, we're going to begin with some big picture ideas about boarding school and then narrow the talk to specifics about the admission process. We'll try to move quickly so that we will have time to answer questions towards the end of the program. As I understand it, you will not be able to send your questions in until the end of the program.
That is correct.
Okay.
Good. We're going to address ourselves to parents most of the time just for the sake of convenience, and we hope that applicants, students who are listening, will have a lot to gain as well from what we have to say.
The essential thing to understand about a boarding school education is that it's personal and its effects are powerful. These are supercharged communities full of people committed to the well-being of others. There are many myths and stereotypes associated with boarding schools and the process of admission. I hope, Faith, tonight that we can provide an insider's view that will be helpful to people listening.
First, I want to talk briefly about the benefits and advantages of boarding school. At a boarding school, students live with dedicated and talented mentors. These are teachers and advisors whose mission is the welfare of their students. At boarding school, students live with a very diverse peer group. Students from all over the world attend boarding schools. At boarding schools, there are innumerable opportunities for in-depth studies and for trying new activities. Boarding school provides a safe and structured and supportive community, and it really is a community. Boarding school provides personal attention. There's extra help when needed, both personal and academic. At boarding school, the classes are small, usually about 10 to 17 students in a section, and the curriculum is very stimulating. At boarding school, there's abundant support for college planning with guidance starting as early as the 10th grade. And not least, at boarding school, everything is in one place, on one campus. Your classes, the accessibility of your teachers, your sports, arts, clubs, and, importantly, your friends, all in one place.
Okay, let's turn to the application process.
Okay, Ian, before we start, I want to make one important point. Don't get fixated on only one school. This is an idea to hold on to as you move through the process. Get fixated on helping your child find a place that's well-equipped to develop two things, self-knowledge and confidence. Remember, it's very likely that your child would thrive in many, many schools.
I have something worth mentioning, too. It's a good idea to listen to your child. And applicants, listen to your parents. The decision about going to boarding school or which school to choose is rarely made by just the parents or just the student. Working together on this process is a learning opportunity in its own right, one that involves collaboration, decision-making, and further understanding about each other's values. Acceptance letters will feel like victories if you work together. Okay, now let's talk about doing some research about schools. Here are some good sources of information. I think it's really important to take a careful look at a view book. People sometimes think about them as just being advertisements for schools, but it's really a school's opportunity to give its statement about its identity. So reviewing the view book, whether it's in a hard copy form and you're reading it in your living room, or you are just checking it out online, which is they're often available online, that's a good source of information. And when we talk about online, of course, there are websites for each school that have so much information. You can dig really deep and find out some good details about what it feels like to be at that school and what its modus operandi is. The interviewer is a good source of information. This is a person whose job it is to help people who are unfamiliar with a school to learn about what makes that school tick. So that person matters quite a bit. A tour guide is very important too. If anything, a tour guide may be most valuable for getting a sense of the tone of a school. And they tend to be people who are upbeat and want they take great pride in showing their school off to people. But they're going to give you the straight scoop. Tour guides are excellent sources of information. Here's an unusual place where you can find some info. Look at the questions that a school asks in its application. You may get a sense of a school's values in seeing what sort of knowledge they value about an applicant. And I think it's fair to say that informed third parties can be very helpful as well.
Could I add here, Ian, that reviewing the course catalog of a school can also yield some very, very helpful information in terms of the scope and depth of what's offered academically.
Absolutely. There are also some questionable sources of information. So-called conventional wisdom regarding particular schools is typically about 10 years out of date. Find out what a school is like today, and that really can be done mostly by making a visit to that school. Anonymous sources such as chat rooms are suspect, I think. And rankings, I think they're, to use a colloquialism, for the birds. Honestly, the imitations of U.S. News and World Report that I see about boarding schools usually have outdated information. I don't think anyone can gather the data necessary to let you know that a school is a good fit for an applicant. And lastly, I think you need to be wary of what I mentioned earlier, just anecdotal information.
For example, your good friends visited many boarding schools for their own daughter, and they have decided opinions about what is best. I use best in quotes. They had their own experience. Yours and your child's experience won't be the same as theirs. It's not a good idea just to go on hearsay. There's some big picture questions that may be helpful as you engage in the process of learning more about schools. What is the school's mission? What programs does it offer that may be particular to that school? How is the school different from other schools? What kinds of students thrive in this school? And, importantly, what kinds of students don't thrive? What are the school's plans for the future?
It's good to gather this information, but be wary of striving to find the one and only perfect school. I was once on a panel with 8 other admission officers. The moderator asked each of us to come up with a word or two to describe our school, and I had to go last. One by one, I heard my ideas taken from me, so I ended up throwing a Hail Mary pass. I said, my school is like Cinderella's slipper. The audience oohed and awed a bit, and I qualified my answer for them. You have to work to find the perfect fit, and it's truly never perfect until you break it in.
Yeah, it's true.
We should aim to make informed decisions, and at the same time, I think it's right to believe that a student can have a great experience at many different schools.
We wanted to make sure to address the fact that there are myths and misnomers and misconceptions about schools. The first one is the matter of the best, that is in quotes, schools, the prestige issue. The most famous schools are ones that are extremely competitive when it comes to admission. Some schools have 2 or 3 or 5 or even more times more qualified applicants than spaces. The most selective school can often be the wrong choice. For the student of average ability, even a diligent and hardworking girl or boy, the pressures in such schools can be overwhelming. The same can be said for very bright students who don't have a strong work ethic.
Here's another myth. Privilege. In America, the conventional wisdom is that boarding schools are only for affluent families. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Scholarships based on financial need help boarding schools enroll talented, ambitious students without regard to their family's ability to pay. Why? Boarding schools want to enroll the best people they can. They want their student body to reflect a value that's fundamental to the American experience, inclusion. Talented young people can join boarding schools and independent schools, but many don't know it. And the student population at boarding schools is often more diverse than that of a typical American community.
There is another misconception surrounding college placement, college choices. It is this, that attending these schools will somehow automatically lead to admission to the most competitive colleges. And certainly the list of colleges attended by alumni at these highly selective schools can be most impressive. However, there is no guarantee whatsoever. Colleges are not impressed by the name of the school a student attends, but they are impressed by what he or she has achieved with the opportunities he's had. You can look at it this way, although this is an exaggeration. Imagine that every student entering grade 9 at one of the 10 or 12 most competitive selective secondary schools previously had straight A's, 99th percentile SATs, 3 varsity sports, has performed in Carnegie Hall, sailed around the world solo, and holds 3 patents or inventions. This is a very, very talented and accomplished bunch. The standard curve, as they start in 9th grade, will reestablish itself in this entering class with a very few at the top, a few at the bottom, and a whole lot in the middle. And that won't be what they have been used to in their previous schools. Keep in mind that it can be far more rewarding for your student to go to a somewhat less pressured school where he or she will have more time for meaningful extracurricular pursuits and have the opportunity to graduate towards the top of his or her class. This can lead to more college opportunities. Ian, I need to ask you what your experience with this is.
Well, you're right, Faith. The profile of that class you described is an exaggeration. Top schools aren't building classes that look like that. I don't think you have to be at the top of the class at a selective school to go to a top university. At my school, we've admitted students who may not have had perfect numbers, but we believe their hard work combined with their other talents would serve them well in the college admission process. I agree that if you are not near the top of your class in school, you have to offer something a top university wants badly, such as great talent as a soccer player. I should point out something about the college counseling work at highly selective schools. They are sending graduates to universities that are, by the numbers, just as selective as they were 30 or 40 years ago. But the names have changed. In 1980, the admit rate at one of the most selective colleges, Yale, was 26.4%. In 2013, do you know how many colleges were more selective than Yale was in 1980, Faith?
You tell us.
63.
That's an amazing
63.
thing to know.
Yes. There's some generalizations about the size of schools that demand close inspection. Large schools provide a wider variety of opportunities, in some but not all cases, better athletic teams for sports that require large numbers of players. In a fundamental way, smaller schools offer more opportunities than larger schools. There are fewer people to compete with for positions on teams, roles in plays, or leadership positions. In larger schools, you'll have the opportunity to know more people, but in smaller schools, it's likely that you will have a close friendships with people from a wide variety of backgrounds. Do not put too much stock in the number of courses that appear in the course catalog either. Every school will offer more courses than you can possibly take. If you're a quiet person, don't think you'll get lost in the crowd at a big school. If there are particular programs there that you love and can't find elsewhere, that's the right school for you. And don't think you'll outgrow a small school. Students' experiences in small schools evolve substantially as they get older.
Now, how do you identify schools that could be good fits for your child? The concept of goodness of fit is very dear to my heart, and I think it's critically important. In order to think about this, you have to consider a number of questions. Does your child need more intellectual stimulation than he's getting in school now? Does your child achieve an excellent record with little effort, or does she have to work very hard to do well? Does your child need prodding to attend to homework responsibilities, or is he independently responsible about getting the job done? How does your child manage pressure? Is your child emotionally ready to be away from home? Do you have confidence in your child's good judgment about social activities? Does your child have any sort of learning difference? Is he or she a slow worker? Is he a slow reader? Is she ill-confident about math? Does he need constant help with day-to-day organization? Does she have difficulty with regulating attention?
Any academic concerns like these mean that you should probably consider schools with established excellent learning supports programs. Sometimes occasional teacher help simply isn't enough. Schools support learning differences differently. Some have a learning specialist on campus and some do not.
And even if your child does not have a diagnosed learning difference, you should ask about the ways the school supports students who are having difficulty.
Okay, here are our tips on selecting schools to consider.
Right. Apply to more than just one or two schools. Apply to a range of schools. Aim to create choices. Be flexible about geographic location and manage expectations.
Sometimes I meet families who have decided to apply to only the most selective schools on the grounds that the child would be just as happy staying at home as attending a less selective school. Really? How do you know? Do you really know the benefits of a school that's less selective? It may be a tremendous school that has not yet been acknowledged as such by the conventional wisdom. It may be, as Faith would say, a great fit where your child can excel and gain confidence.
Also, if you apply to only one or two schools, consider the effect on your child if he or she is denied. This will mean staying at home by default, not by choice, and the effect on self-esteem can be pretty demoralizing.
It's important that you consider a range of schools. Shooting for the moon is fine, but it's wise to have some safer bets, too.
In many ways, this process is about creating choices. It's a mistake to think that only the most competitive selective schools are of significant value in the education of a talented student.
Also, the most selective schools have at least twice as many strong applicants as they can admit. Top schools have to pass on great students every year.
I worked with a boy who was denied at 5 intensely competitive schools, went to a somewhat less competitive school where he excelled, and he's now at Princeton.
It's natural to consider geographical location, such as the convenience of being near airports or the driving distance from home. Try to be flexible about this. Again, your primary consideration should be how good the fit is for your child.
And help your child to manage expectations. Help your child to be realistic. This is really important. In conversation with your children, I think it's very important for parents to be equally enthusiastic about all the schools they apply to. I think it's a big mistake to refer to any school as a backup. If that's the only school that accepts your son or daughter, the risk is that the student will see himself or herself as second best.
Okay, let's talk about some application requirements, deadlines, and schedules. A complete application includes a visit or an interview with the school, application forms and essays, the academic transcript, usually for the past 2 years in the current school year, teacher recommendations. Recommendations will be required from the current English and math teachers and a principal or guidance counselor or other school official. That's generally called the school recommendation. Standardized test scores are also something that you have to remember to be, this is an important part of the equation.
Yes, and I might add here that we're often asked about how SAT scores are weighted in an application file, and the answer is no specific weight is assigned to them. They're just one piece of many. And I can't tell you the number of times I've said to parents that scores alone don't get you in, but they can keep you out. So they are important.
I agree.
Application deadlines. Generally, the deadlines for application will be anywhere from January 8 to January 31, and some schools have later deadlines. It's very important that you observe the application deadlines for the schools in which you're interested. I should add, however, that invariably there are good schools that have openings after the conventional application deadlines and the conventional school admission decision states. Try to get your application in at least a couple of weeks before the formal deadline. Don't wait until the last minute. By the way, getting your completed application in very early is in no way an advantage. It's smarter, actually, for a student to work on application details after the fall term is well underway. I've also often been asked whether it helps to tell a school it is your first choice. Well, this can help. It's not necessary, and generally it really doesn't make any significant difference in admissions decisions. And never, ever tell more than one school that it's your first choice.
I do not believe in pressing a 14-year-old or a 13-year-old or a 15-year-old to tell me whether or not my school is her or his first choice. If your child feels pressure to declare a school to be their first choice, whether that be an officer, a coach, or anyone else, I would think very seriously about that school's culture.
I totally agree, Ian.
Okay, let's take a look at the timeline of this whole process. We've already discussed doing some research. You submit an inquiry, and that really triggers a lot of information coming your way from various members of the school community, and it also helps us prepare for your visit because it gives us a sense of your interest. After you've submitted an inquiry, you schedule a visit. Let's see. Most schools have a page that displays the interview schedule. It's helpful to have that in hand when you call. Some schools have an online system in which you can schedule your interview based on the openings that appear on screen.
Turning now to the actual visit at a school. A school visit usually means a tour of a school, generally with a student, followed by an interview with an admissions officer. Your child will be interviewed, and then usually the admissions officer will talk briefly with parents. Typically, a school visit takes about 2 hours. And by the way, book an appointment with the school. Don't just drop in unannounced and expect a tour and interview.
That just doesn't work.
Each school sets its own schedule for admission visitor appointments. Schools generally don't offer appointments after about 2:30 in the afternoon. Many schools, not all, but many, do offer Saturday morning appointments, but not afternoons. They tend to get very booked up for the Saturday appointment slots, so planning well in advance is important. Many schools don't offer appointments on Wednesday afternoons because that's when interscholastic sports take place. And listen to this, it isn't wise to schedule more than 2 schools per day, even if it seems geographically quite possible. Touring and interviewing at a school takes energy. You want to have your game face on. 2 is enough.
Agreed.
Now, at the risk of being overly detailed here, it's helpful to know the vacation schedule of boarding schools. Each school's website will include the calendar for the year. In the fall, all schools have a parents' weekend, usually in October. This is for the parents of currently enrolled students. Each school chooses its own dates for parents' weekends, and admissions visitors can't book appointments during this time. The Parents' Weekend typically starts on the Friday, and in most cases, on the following Monday, the students are off with their parents and there are no classes. This can make scheduling your visits complicated, as one school may be closed for visitors one weekend and another the following weekend. You'll need to consult the calendar for each school in order to make your planning easier. In late November, schools are closed for the entire week of Thanksgiving. The students go home. This often includes the Friday and Saturday preceding Thanksgiving week, and it typically includes the following Monday after Thanksgiving so that students can travel back to school after the busiest travel weekend of the year. Then the winter holiday will start a week or 10 days before Christmas, and students will return very soon after the start of the new year. Spring vacation starts fairly early in March, and students return toward the end of March. Typically, that vacation is about 2.5 weeks. I go into all this detail because those vacation times, in addition to the parents' weekends, are ordinarily not times when schools will schedule admissions visitors.
What about visits and interviews in the summer? We understand that summer may be the only time that some families can find time to visit, and most schools will accommodate appointments on a reduced summer schedule. A summer visit is better than no visit, but do your best to see schools when the students are here. The people are more important than the buildings at boarding schools.
We do know, of course, that for some families, visiting the school in person isn't logistically or financially possible. Most schools can offer an interview by Skype or an interview with an alumnus in the family's location. But if you can possibly get to schools in person, do so. It's important for you to talk with a variety of people on campus, student tour guide, teachers, etc., and to experience the atmosphere and the culture of the school.
Enjoy the tour. Observe the way people interact outside of the classroom and inside. Little things can be revealing. Ask questions of the tour guide. You may spend a number of years in this community, so take charge and find answers to questions that matter to you. Tour guides will not be experts in every aspect of the school, but they will certainly give you some helpful information. They may also give you information that's flat out wrong. In the school where I once worked, a new science building was being constructed. More than once I met a visiting family that year, and they told me, the Scozzari Science Center looks impressive. Tour guides were naming the building after the construction company whose name appeared on signs outside. It's not a bad idea to ask interviewers the same questions you ask tour guides. Interview tips. We think it's really important for you to do your homework on the schools. The interview is your opportunity to let an admission officer at a school know about you and your interests. It's good to take some time to think about the life you've led so far, what matters to you, and why you're interested in a boarding school. Do not over-prepare by trying to memorize your answers. Be genuine. Do not feel that you have to be sold on the idea of attending boarding school when you interview.
We're addressing this, of course, largely to the students who are listening, but their parents need to be aware as well. Kids will want to know, what will they ask me? Well, each interview and each interviewer is different. There isn't a set list of questions they all ask. You'll want to know, what are they looking for? Well, they're looking to know you as well as they can in a pretty short time period. Review the school's website in advance so that you know something about it and have some sensible questions to ask. Questions like, how big is this school? Or, do you have soccer? Should be known to you in advance. But questions like, could you tell me some more about dorm life? Or, I'd love to know more about your soccer program. Open up areas of conversations. Questions are a good way to express your interest. I just used the word conversation. At its best, an interview really is a conversation. One-word answers are not a very good idea. Respond as thoughtfully as you can to any questions you may be asked. Here's another helpful idea. In advance, you might want to consider what courses you would take each year at this school. Using the website, try writing a course list for each of the 4 years, paying attention to the school's own academic requirements, of course. Usually, students are limited to 5 courses a year. What if some of the courses that interest you don't seem to fit in? This can lead to a good conversation in an interview. Review your own interests and accomplishments. Use them as a platform for asking questions. Do you love drama? Wouldn't you like to know if younger students can participate in school plays? Have you enjoyed community service? Ask if you'll be able to find time for that in addition to homework and sports requirements. Do you love to write? Ask about the student newspaper and how you could contribute to it. Are you a good cook? Ask how you could use that skill. Or express enthusiasm for trying some new things you've read about on the website. Want to try lacrosse, rock climbing, skiing? Want to try debating, metalworking? Want to learn programming or make a website? And don't be afraid to talk about things you've accomplished or won. It's okay to boast a little, though not in a boasting way. After all, the interviewer really wants to know about you.
Also, if you have a particular interest in a certain subject matter, or arts program or sport, we may be able to arrange for you to meet with a coach, teacher, or arts director if you ask about this in advance. Schedules do not always line up, but if you express an interest in communicating with someone, you're likely to hear from them later if you do not see them during your visit.
And one final thing about interviews. Don't emphasize college expectations. Parents, don't say you want your child to go to, you fill in the blank, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the Ivy League, or one of the top 10 colleges. This will not sit well with interviewers.
Now a few words about the SSAT.
Yes. Many schools require candidates to submit scores from the secondary school admission test, the SSAT. The SSAT is offered nationally and internationally in standard group administrations on 8 Saturdays each year. There is no limit on the number of standard SSAT tests you can take. All the information you will need is on the SSAT website, ssat.org. It's extremely helpful to familiarize yourself with the website well in advance, as it provides details about test dates, locations, registration deadlines, fees, special testing accommodations, which level of the test to take, and other important information. Students in grade 5 through 7 take the middle level SSAT. Kids in grades 8 through 11 take the upper level SSAT. The test consists of a writing sample and multiple choice sections in math, verbal, and reading.
The writing sample isn't scored or graded, but it is important. Schools receive copies, and they will compare a student's SSAT writing sample with the writing in their application essays. Schools must receive test results directly from SSAT. You control which schools the scores are sent to. You may do this at the time of registration, or you may wait until you see your scores to indicate which schools should receive the tests. No school will receive your child's SSAT scores unless you authorize them to be sent.
You have to submit SSAT scores from the school year during which your child is applying. That is, if she's applying for grade 9, she must submit SSAT scores from the fall of grade 8. If you want your child to take the SSAT a year in advance, to have some exposure to what it's like to take the test, and in order to decide if some coaching might be helpful, you can do that, but be sure to designate the correct grade level the student is in at the time. As an example, a 7th grader should not take the upper level SSAT. Too often, parents will have their 7th grader take the upper level to see how he will do on it, but it's a mistake because his results will be compared with 8th graders, not with his own cohort in 7th grade. It's not a bad idea to register for 2 SSAT administrations in the fall of grade 8, for example, in October and in December. And at the time you register, don't designate any schools to receive either set of scores. If the October scores are great, you can cancel the December registration, and if they're not, the student has another shot at it, and you can compare scores before deciding which set should be sent to schools, or maybe sending both. The schools understand that you want them to see the best set of scores, and that's what they want too.
Yes, if you wish, you may submit more than one set of scores to schools. Students who score below the median tend to see the biggest gains in their score. If you do quite well on the test, the records indicate that it is unlikely that your scores will rise substantially. Most schools engage in superscoring. And what is superscoring? It means that we'll take the highest score you receive in each section of the test and look at that as your final score. Submitting more than 2 sets of scores is generally considered to be unnecessary. Students for whom English is a second language face different testing requirements at each school. Generally, if a student has not been studying at a school where English is the primary language of instruction, then you must take a TOEFL test of English as a foreign language. So consult the TOEFL website for information and detail.
We should also note that a number of schools accept the ISEE, the Independent School Entrance Exam, in lieu of the SSAT. Be sure to check the individual requirements of each school for specific standardized test requirements.
A few words about common applications. Today, many schools use one or both of 2 online application systems. Both the Gateway Common Application and SSAT's SAO, Standard Application Online, handle about the same number of applications. Except for the individual essays, forms are common for both systems. Gateway and SSAT are working on ways to create a single stream for submitting applications and recommendations. But at this time, recommenders must submit different forms based on the system that each school uses. Be sure to consult each school's application requirements. Let's return to our timeline. We've been through our period of researching schools, submitting the inquiry, scheduling a visit, scheduling the SSAT, preparing for the SSAT. Just a word about preparing for the SSAT. You will be in much better shape if you buy a book of sample tests and familiarize yourself with that test before you go into the testing circumstance. I think it can be very helpful for you to essentially rehearse. So do prepare for the SSAT. Ask your teachers for recommendations. Do give them some advance warning. Please give them at least 3 or 4 weeks to get to this task. It tends to be something that's in addition to a heavy workload. Do well in school throughout the year that you're applying. That's very important, obviously. And, of course, you'll have to take the SSAT, and then after that's done, you begin preparing the application. Finally, you will press that button and submit your application. Preparing thoughtful answers to essays and short answers can enhance an applicant's chances of admission substantially. Now, after you submit your application in January, you will have a waiting period. And on March 10th, you will be able to access your decision. Decisions tend to be delivered electronically these days. Schools tend to follow the guideline of releasing decisions on the state, but they do so at different times in the day. I think it makes a lot of sense for families to access their decisions when they're together at home. Do consider this.
And the school decision will be one of 3 things. The letter could offer admission, the student has been accepted, or the letter could be a denial, the student has not been accepted, or the letter could say that your child has been placed on a waiting list. That's a frustrating position to be in because waiting lists carry no guarantee that a place will open up, and there isn't any particular schedule for this when schools will consider their waiting lists, although several weeks after March 10th, schools may start to turn to their waiting lists. Then there's a matter of revisits. Students who have been offered admission will have the opportunity to revisit schools. These take place in late March and early April. It's over about a week's period. Can't start before late March because, of course, the schools are on spring vacation. So kids can do this before making a final decision. This will be your best opportunity to get a feel for each school which you're considering seriously. Each school makes its own schedule for revisit dates, usually several choices of dates. Students who are placed on waiting lists are not allowed to revisit.
April 10th is the day that by which you must declare your choice. Once you've made your decision, it's really best to let schools know. So as soon as you know where you're headed, inform the school so they can make a decision about whether or not they're going to return to a waiting list. Yeah. It's very helpful to let them know as soon as possible, but you are entitled to wait until April 10th. Tuition, financial aid. There's no doubt that boarding school is a significant investment. Boarding school tuitions can range from $20,000 to more than $50,000. The School Scholarship Service, SSS, does careful work building formulas to determine who may qualify for aid. Many people don't realize that they may qualify for financial aid. If you do apply for financial aid, it's extremely important to submit your forms by specific deadlines. Consult each school's requirements for more information on this. The primary driver of the estimated family contribution is a family's annual income, but other assets do come into play. Home equity is part of the equation for some schools, but not for others. If you think you may qualify for financial aid, do not make the mistake of not applying to a school because the tuition may be higher than other schools. The most expensive schools may be the least expensive for some families because they may offer the most financial aid. I should also note the important point that financial aid formulas for secondary school education are developed with the knowledge that families do have to pay for college in the years ahead. And I should also mention something about applicants who are from abroad. Financial aid is rarely given to people from overseas, but there are a number of schools that do offer aid to students from abroad. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but you have to be realistic. Most aid is set aside for citizens of the United States. So if you are accepted, you will receive your financial award, your financial aid award when you receive your decision.
I'd like to comment on educational consultants. Even with doing a lot of diligent homework on the internet, it can be difficult to know if schools you're developing an interest in are realistic possibilities for your son or daughter. An independent educational consultant can be very helpful in sorting through the possibilities and making recommendations about specific schools. They can help a lot with organization, and they can provide some objective advice about school choices. To find a consultant in your area, consult the website of the Independent Educational Consultants Association, IECAonline.com. Many consultants are well equipped to work with students at a distance by Skype, email, and phone. The goal of any IECA member is to help families find the best match. Independent consultants do charge a fee for their services, with a flat fee generally ranging from perhaps $1,500 to as high as $10,000, and hourly fees in the range of $120 or so to about $400. Sounds like a lot. In view of the financial commitment, however, that you'll be making for 4 years or 3 years or 2 years of boarding school tuition, working with an independent educational consultant could be a very good investment.
Okay, some final thoughts. What are we looking for in admission offices? Well, very generally speaking, we are looking for an academic record that's typical of the school's enrolled students. Now, some schools are going to be looking for straight A students, and some schools will be looking for students who have a mixture of different grades. Standardized testing should be in line with the scores of enrolled students. Each school has different standards for those test scores. We are all looking for good recommendations about character, and we're looking for good recommendations about the academic life of a student. Extracurricular talents are also valuable to school communities. We look for people who are going to contribute to our communities, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a great tennis player or that you're a superb skier. We're looking for people who can do a variety of different things that may not even apply to the arts or athletics. Increasingly, we see schools looking closely at what are known as non-cognitive traits. time management, self-control, work habits, perseverance, self-efficacy. Know this. As with the college admission process described earlier, decisions are often made not only on a student's suitability for a school, but on what a school needs to complement its student body.
You mean, Ian, that as the school might have graduated a tuba player and need another one for their orchestra, or they may be
correct
thin in a particular sport and need some great athletes.
That's correct.
You're going to be amazed by what you learn about boarding schools. Each school has different emphases, and there's more than one school that will serve your child well. All of them are committed to the welfare and development of students during the very critical time of adolescence.
Listen to each other. Make your choices together as a family. Learning to make decisions through consensus can be a valuable byproduct of the secondary school search process.
There is a school for everyone. The goodness of fit is the most important factor in your deliberations. You and schools want your child to be challenged but not overwhelmed. We all want your child to thrive. We wish all of you the best of luck as you embark on the exciting educational process of exploring boarding opportunities.
So, Trish, that's our show. We're ready to answer any questions that folks submit.
Well, first, thank you so much for the information. I'm sure our attendees are going to have quite a few questions. I've opened up the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Please type your questions into the box, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. Just a reminder to be as general as possible with your questions and only answer your question once. For those of you that have specific or individual questions pertaining to a school, we suggest that you contact the admission offices at the school to which you are applying. If you do have questions that are SSAT specific, feel free to reach out to our customer service team at info@ssat.org. You can also reach our customer service team online via chat at ssat.org or by phone. So we have a few questions rolling in. The first one that seems to be popping up quite a bit here is, are there better chances for entry if a student is applying to 10th or 11th grade?
That really depends on the school's particular housing arrangement. Some schools may have a surplus of beds at the 10th grade level, and some may have more openings at 9th grade. Generally, we see people entering our schools in 9th grade, so it's more typical to enter at that point.
I could add to that, however, that the timing has to be right for the particular student. I've seen times when a family aiming at 9th grade placement for their kid comes to realize that that's really too young. The student isn't ready to be away from home, or the student may be very, very young for his grade and developmentally needs another year with his family. If the student is very young for his grade, there's also the possibility of applying, doing 9th grade at home and applying for 9th grade in a boarding school and gaining all the advantage that an extra year of growth and maturity before college can provide to a child. And as well, of course, that will help a kid to develop a richer academic record for college purposes. It can be hard to enter in grade 11, it happens, but it's maybe harder for a student entering at that level to establish himself in leadership positions, things of that sort. There's not a perfect answer.
What else do we have, Trish?
The next questions we have are regarding support systems at school. How are dorm parents selected, and how will I have a chance to meet these people as a parent of my student I'll be dropping off at boarding school?
Your point people in a school tend to be those with whom your child lives, and that may occasionally be the student's advisor too. So we have dormitory heads and we have advisors. Every teacher in a school serves as an advisor, and many of the people at one point in their career will serve in the dormitory. This is a really committed lot. These are people who tend to be very talented in their particular disciplines, but they're chosen to work in boarding schools because they want to work with adolescents, work with people at this really interesting time of life. They're very committed people, and they know that one of the most important things they do in education is working with people just as they're growing up. So boarding school dormitory heads are chosen because they are felt to be people who are going to work well with students.
And when you are dropping your student off at the school, you will meet the dorm parents, and it's to be hoped that you will meet the advisor as well. When I was a very young admission director, I encouraged parents to call me by my first name, and that somehow helped establish a relationship with them as I was starting a relationship with their child. You might, as a parent, when you're greeting the dorm parents, say, "Oh, please call me Susie," or "Please call me Frank." It's up to you, but that can be an icebreaker.
One thing that people should recognize about boarding school is the chances are that your child will have more adult eyes on them at a boarding school than they will at home. You're just living with a lot of adults.
What's next, Trish?
Thanks for that. That was actually a fantastic answer. As someone who has visited many a boarding school and saw that personal relationship between dorm parents and their students. So the next question is regarding support systems for students of color. How important is diversity at schools, and how are these students supported throughout their careers at these schools?
Virtually every school will have a representative on the faculty who will be the leader of people of color, and you will see many multicultural affairs directors as well. So we see good support for that particular element of coming into an environment that's different from the one you've come from. And we also see support for students of color, just as we see support for any other student in a community. A boarding school is a great place to see people of different backgrounds mixing together. And in this era, this is a very important part of life in boarding schools. We are so far away from a world that I once joined way back in the early 80s, where there wasn't as much diversity. Come onto our campuses and you will be impressed by what you see. These worlds are open to people from all different backgrounds.
Fantastic. There's some other questions regarding what happens on weekends, and are students supervised? Are there trips? What actually happens when the culture is no longer in the classroom?
I'll let Ian take most of that, but it should be pointed out perhaps that in many boarding schools there are Saturday morning classes, and so the school week can go through Saturday morning, and then there are usually athletic activities in the afternoon. And I should add as well that students can go home for the weekend. If it's a school without Saturday classes, students can usually be at home for Saturday and Sunday. If it's a school with Saturday classes, you could probably leave after your last class. Not every weekend. There are closed weekends. They want the whole school to be together a lot of the weekends. But in fact, there are many opportunities to go home. And maybe, Ian, you could talk about other things that happen on weekends and chaperoning and trips.
There are things about being in boarding school that are just a blast for kids. There are dances on the weekends. There are people who come on campus and give performances. There could be a hypnotist on campus. There are theatrical shows. There are buses that will take kids off to a mall to see a movie, so you can feel very much like someone who's growing up in their local high school. You'll just do those sorts of things as well. But this is really a Saturday night activity because you tend to be very busy with athletics or some other activity until later in the afternoon on Saturday. Sundays are a necessary day of rest in our communities. We tend to be tired, and yet we still see these adolescents with the energy to go out and work in community service or go for a hike take advantage of the peace that we find on many of our campuses.
Great. Thank you very much, Ian. There are some questions regarding the use of social media on campuses, and that some schools are now using social media to find roommates and match roommates. So the first question is, how are schools matching roommates? And second, how are schools using social media these days on campus, and what are their general policies?
Let me take that right off the bat and go right for that roommate selection piece. A lot of families don't really want their children to be on Facebook, so there aren't that many schools that are connecting folks with each other that early. It does happen, but many schools just respect the opinions of many parents that social media should be somewhat restricted. You will see roommates matched by admission offices and deans of student offices. People take a lot of time to try to get a nice mix of people in a dormitory and to get people who have something in common, some reason why we think they may be a good match. That really takes a lot of work, and we're very careful about that. Now, and regarding social media on campus, even access to the internet is restricted to a certain extent in some places. At some places, it is monitored. The use of the internet is monitored. In some places, it's access is turned off at a certain hour. In some schools, you'll have to actually put your phones and computers right outside of your bedroom door when you're younger. When you're older, you're expected to have a bit more responsibility about that. But we're very conscious of making sure that students are not getting too absorbed with life on electronic media.
Excellent.
Okay.
It appears to be some questions, mainly from international students, curious about the extended periods of time when they might be able to take trips home. Is this normally during holiday periods? Are there other longer breaks that you could suggest? Or are there welcome weekends for parents to visit outside of the traditional parent weekends in generally October?
Yes. Schools, of course schools welcome parents to come and stay in nearby accommodations and have their kids out with them for a weekend if it suits everybody's schedule and it's an open weekend when the students are allowed to be away for the weekend. So the answer to that is definitely yes. Schools do welcome parents on campus. Going home for the Thanksgiving break is, I think, entirely a personal matter for most families. If you live halfway around the world and it takes the better part of 2 days to get home, it may not be worth it to go home for Thanksgiving for the very short time on the ground that it allows before you have to turn around and spend 2 days getting back to school. In the event of kids who can't get home for Thanksgiving, schools will make every effort to help that child find a suitable and chaperoned opportunity for the Thanksgiving week. Very often a roommate or a school friend will invite a student from a great distance to spend the Thanksgiving time with his or her family. It's a wonderful thing to do, to experience an American Thanksgiving. Typically, international students do go home for the winter break and the spring break. They're long enough to make the travel realistic, or if their parents come to the States, they can take their child and go off and do some fun things together, maybe take a skiing trip or some other kind of a recreational opportunity. It's a nice break for everybody. Ian, what do you say? Well,
I think you should know that your child is not going to be ignored when there are short vacations, the long weekends, for instance. There are local families that will take students in, but they also are most likely to be bonding with a family of a friend, and they'll spend some time together. So just so you understand the vacation schedule, you'll have typically about 10 days around Thanksgiving, 3 weeks around the December holiday, Christmas holiday. You'll see 3 weeks in March, and then there's 3 months in the summer. So families will see a lot of their children, even if you're living on the other side of the world.
Great, thank you. There's some questions also about a search tool for looking at boarding schools to be able to perhaps filter by a type of sport the school may offer, or perhaps a special arts program or music program. I can say, as a representative of SSATB, we do have a search function on our website that allows you to both look for schools and filter accordingly. Ian, Faith, what are your favorite tools to offer to parents to look for schools that are a match?
My first go-to would be the SSAT website, because I find it very useful to type in some criteria and see what I get, and I'm sometimes surprised. There are things I didn't know.
You'll also find material on the Association of Boarding Schools website. They'll have information about schools. And the Gateway application, the members of that school, all through the Gateway website, you can have easy access to those sites. But as far as a really particular search, such as which schools offer water polo, frankly, I actually don't know a really good filter mechanism for that.
You can usually put through the sports questions in the website you're consulting for a search.
Yeah, certainly. The last question that we'll have for this evening is regarding religious observances. We've had quite a few students ask regarding how religion is handled on campus. Are students allowed to attend services during class times, perhaps, or perhaps even on Sundays?
Well, it depends on the school. Some schools have a religious affiliation and some schools do not have one, but all schools will offer some sort of religious services. The school where I work is an Episcopal school. Many of the great American schools founded in the 19th century came from the Episcopal tradition. In a school like this, you'll see Buddhist and Hindu services. You'll see Muslim services, Jewish services, Catholic services. There's a great respect for religion, and there's also respect for those who are non-practicing as well.
And schools are very respectful of special religious observances of their students. Jewish students are generally allowed to observe their religious holidays, and the schools will be helpful in making ways for them to do it, and students of other religions as well. I think there's a lot of flexibility around this, and if you happen to go to a school that, as Ian was saying, is a church-related school, please don't think ever that they're trying to convert you to their religion. They're not. They're respectful of yours.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for all the wonderful questions this evening and for all of you that have taken the time to find out more about what's happening in boarding schools and the incredible opportunities that are abound. I want to thank Ian and Faith for their time for both preparing and presenting tonight. A reminder that this webinar has been recorded and will be made available on the Health Center page at ssat.org tomorrow. Thank you again for attending, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. May you find your best match in the school this year. Good luck.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Trish.
Bye-bye.